In an isolated forest cabin, a family experiences a chilling night. The daughter claims a lady unable to reach the window lock is asking to enter, and the parents find unusual signs in the darkness. As the story unfolds, readers are drawn into a world filled with the unknown and fear. Thank you for your subscription and likes. You can leave your thoughts in the comments section. My girlfriend and I were driving to see the lights of our town on a cold December night. After stopping in a remote spot to get cozy in the back seat, we noticed an old woman in a thin shirt leaning on our car's hood, staring at us. Why was she there on a cold, rainy night? Was her presence real or a figment of our imagination? This suspense makes me eager to know what happens next. Thank you for your subscription and likes. You can leave your thoughts in the comments section. One night last autumn, I was working late at the office on a project. I ended up staying later than I wanted and I missed my train home. Couldn't be helped. I went to get a taxi home. I was really tired and the taxi driver was really energetic. He was incredibly talkative. I didn't like it to begin with, but in the end I joined in with him and had a chat. It was quite nice. The route the driver took went through a mountain pass. It was all perfectly normal. I lived out in the sticks. It was dark on those mountain roads. I was starting to feel sleepy. There was a dense forest to the left-hand side. It was so empty out there. I don't think I saw another car out driving that night. The driver went a little quiet and I wondered what the problem was. He had been so talkative before it looked like something was on his mind. I caught him quickly glimpsing at me in the rear-view mirror and I started to get a little nervous. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I was mentally reviewing our conversation and trying to find out if I had said something to upset the taxi driver. I caught another glimpse of my driver's face when he glanced at me in the rear-view mirror. Again, he looked worried, like a completely different person, so I decided to break the silence. Hey, is everything okay? Hey, it's nothing really, but could you just do me a favor? Just from now on, could you not look out the window? Okay, just really don't do it. Thanks. I was so shocked by his change in behavior that all I could reply was okay. We continued on our journey and silence had resumed again. I sat there puzzled for a while, but I did as he asked. I didn't look out of the window. I couldn't imagine for what reason it would be necessary, though. A few moments passed and I got a little bored, or maybe frustrated, with the fact that I couldn't do what I wanted. So I asked the driver, hey, why shouldn't I look out the window? Pal, he didn't reply. He just kept looking straight ahead. Naturally, I started to feel a little nervous again. We were still driving alongside that deep and dense forest and this guy was acting strangely. I didn't like it. We came to a set of traffic lights and I heard some voice beginning to yell from the side of the car. It was coming from the other side of the window that I was told not to look out of. I couldn't take not looking out of the window anymore, so I ignored the driver's request and I looked out there. A middle-aged man was shambling his way over to the taxi. He looked exhausted but very angry. At the same time, he cued his dirty-looking hands to the glass and then he peered in at me. It looked like he studied my face very carefully. I was taken aback. I just wanted to get out of there. But the traffic light was a solid red moon in the dark. I looked back at the stranger staring at me, and then he slammed his hand on the glass and shouted it wasn't you. And with that, he turned away to leave, just as the traffic light changed color and we pulled away. I asked the taxi driver what the hell that was all about and he said, see, this is why I always tell people not to look at that guy. He's out here all the time. He just stands there holding up traffic, pressing that crossing button whenever he hears a car coming. I guess he's gotten pretty good at it, since he always stops me when I come through here. I was kind of shocked. I mean, that didn't really tell me anything. I wanted to know why he knew that was going to happen, so I asked. I heard from someone who apparently lives near the guy that the reason he does that is because his wife was killed in a hit-and-run accident. They were out on a late-night stroll and he actually got a good look at the guy who hit her. Apparently he got out of the car for a couple of seconds as if he was trying to decide whether or not to help, but then he fled. That's when that old man got a good look at him. He gave the police a description of the car and the driver, but to this day he's still at large. They never found him, so the old man has taken up the task. He waits there most nights trying to catch a glimpse of the guy who killed his wife and split. I guess you kind of get why he said it wasn't you now, right? I told you not to look his way because I don't know, I didn't want him to SP you out. But I guess he did. That guy was scary, but overall I feel really bad for him. I hope one day they do catch the hit and run driver so he can rest easy to think he stands there alone most nights. Just praying he'll find the culprit makes my heart feel heavy. I went to one of these matchmaking parties a while back. I was tired of being alone and I just really wanted to meet a nice guy. I'm a woman, by the way. Now I realize that I was better off staying alone, and you'll soon find out why I feel that way. It went kind of well and I actually ended up being asked out by someone. The guy wasn't exactly my type. If I'm being honest, he was pretty good looking, but I think that he was a little immature for me also. He was younger too. I decided to give him a try because he asked me out for a drive, and I thought that was a little more interesting than sitting in a coffee house sharing awkward silences. He came to pick me up in the morning. I got in his car and we set off for our driving date. We planned on going to a little tourist location with some great views. We were going to have some lunch and then head home in the evening. It was a nice morning and afternoon. He convinced me that he wasn't as immature as I thought he was. It was a fun date. When it started to get dark out, we set about heading back to our hometown. It was when we were driving home that night that I noticed a change in his behavior. He was starting to act strange. The vibes he was putting out were very much, "I don't want you to go yet, and please don't leave me." I put up with his neediness, expecting him to change his attitude once he noticed that it was making me uncomfortable. But he didn't change. His neediness and his bossiness were strong. The guy who had made me laugh and who I was keen to have a second date with was gone, and now a domineering and controlling guy was sat in the driving seat. We had discussed earlier how we both had work in the morning. I thought about that part of our date, as I noticed how dark it was getting out. He wasn't interested in trying to converse with me any longer, nor was he interested in trying to make me smile or laugh. He had created such a horrible atmosphere in the car that I could hardly bring myself to mention to him about how late it was getting. I decided that I would ditch him as soon as I was able to get out of the car, for I planned to work. I just needed him to stop. We were going down dark country lanes. There weren't many opportunities to ask him to stop. I bided my time, and when I saw the lights of a convenience store up ahead, I said aloud the sentence I'd been practicing in my mind for the last 15 minutes. "Hey, do you mind pulling over? I want to use the bathroom," I asked. He agreed, and I thought I'd get away from this weirdo. I expected him to pull over into the convenience store's parking lot, but he zoomed past it. I said something like, "Hey, why didn't you stop?" And he replied, "I know a public restroom closer to home." I hated that he could have easily stopped, but he didn't. He eventually did stop, but he stopped at a public bathroom in the middle of nowhere. I doubted that there would even be cell reception, but I checked my phone before getting out and I noticed I had a couple of bars. I figured that I would be able to guide someone to come pick me up from here, or at least share my location. So I took my chance. I got out of the car, stood up, and then stooped to pick up my handbag. I grabbed one handle of the bag and turned to walk to the bathroom. Then I felt some resistance. It was like my bag was stuck. I looked back and saw my date was holding the other handle of my bag. I stood there stunned. I couldn't believe that this guy could get any worse. My eyes then met his and he said to me, "Do you really need that if you're just using the bathroom?" I just dropped my phone in my handbag, so I couldn't even grab that. I froze. I really didn't know what to do. I couldn't be left out in the middle of nowhere with no bag, no phone, and no coat. I wasn't really paying attention to what roads we'd been on, so I didn't know how long it would take me to get home. I reluctantly had to get back into that creep's car. We set off. I had to hide my fear from him. He was controlling, but he wasn't going to beat me. I didn't want him to think he had some kind of power over me. I didn't want to give him that victory. I next tried to hint that it was hot and I needed something to drink. I was surprised that he really didn't need all that much convincing. I guessed that he was thirsty too. At this point we'd been driving around and around for a couple of hours as we approached a convenience store. He parked up in the furthest spot away and said he would be right back. He darted out of the car and I thought to myself, now's my chance. I tried to make a break for it as he ran into the store, but the door would not budge. He must have locked the door. He came back and he had a big smile on his face. As soon as he opened his door, I shut across into his seat and pushed my weight against the door. This caused him to back up a bit. I told him that if he didn't leave me alone, that I would be calling the police. One of the convenience store staff members stepped out at the perfect time to take the garbage bags out and was alerted to our heated exchange. When he realized that he was being watched, he tooted at me and shook his head. He then got into his car and sped away. I called a taxi and got myself home. I was shaken up, but I tried my best to hold it together until I was behind a closed door. Then it all came out. I was really upset. I later found out when I spoke to the police about him that he stopped his ex-girlfriend and had an official police caution just a month before we went out on our driving date. It feels amazing to be saying that I got home in one piece, because I truly don't know what that guy is capable of. I hope I never run into him again. A few years back, I had a very frightening experience while I was out driving. It was the Friday before the Christmas break, and I was driving along a national highway at night to visit my long-distance partner. I finished work a little later than I wanted to, so by the time I headed out on the roads and even before I left, it was getting dark out. As my journey progressed, I noticed that the cars on the road gradually decreased in number as I got further from the city center. I was tired, but I was really looking forward to seeing my boyfriend, so I decided to take a short break as not to cause an accident. He lived far from my city. I guessed I had about another 2 hours drive before I got to his town. I got back on the road and I was in the zone. I drove while listening to some music. I didn't even care about what kind of time it was for a while, but when I checked the dashboard clock, it was just after 1:30 in the morning. It was around this point that the smooth national highway roads had ended and I was into winding mountainous roads. Luckily, there were no cars on these winding roads, so I was able to keep at my own pace without being rushed. I kept things to what I would describe as a comfortable speed, and I was enjoying the tunes on the radio. However, when I rounded a hairpin corner, the radio suddenly fell silent. At first, I thought it was because I was out driving in the middle of nowhere that the signal dropped out. It did that weird static, buzzing hiss thing that the radio does when it searches for signal. I put up with it for a little while in the hope that I would find the radio station again, but I couldn't. Then something else happened. I heard a faint voice coming through the storm of static. I thought that it might just have been cross channels and I hoped it would be fixed soon, but then something very strange happened. It suddenly felt as if someone had jerked the steering wheel to the left. This caused me to slam on the brakes and pull the car to a stop at the side of a mountainous road along this pitch-black road. The only light source that was available was the one coming from my headlights. I didn't want to listen to the static anymore, so I turned off the engine for a second. It was a cold night because it was December, and as soon as the heater was shut off, the windows began to fog. It must have been colder outside than I realized. I was really shaken up. I was wondering what the hell happened. I had no idea what the sudden force was that seemed to direct the steering wheel. I was scared of what I just experienced. Picture. It was the middle of the night and something completely unexpected and unexplained happened that was life-threatening. My heart was pounding in my chest. I needed a distraction. I tried to calm myself down. I started the engine again with the hope that I would get some kind of radio signal. It was still static. I went to shut it off, but then a voice came through louder than all the other cross-talk that I heard that night, and that voice said, "You will be with me soon." I honestly broke out in goosebumps. I didn't know what else to do, but shut off the radio and speed away from that area. I just really wanted to get out of those dark mountain roads and get back on some highways with some streetlights. It only took me about another 10 minutes to get back to the bright lights of the highway, but the whole while I drove through those dark, winding mountain roads, that cold voice I heard in the sea of static rang in my ears. That voice sounded impossibly cold to me. It sounded like it couldn't have come from the living. I felt so scared for the remainder of the drive. When I finally arrived at my boyfriend's place and got a chance to tell him about what I experienced, he drafted off and said that I just got worked up because I was overtired. He essentially calls it an auditory hallucination. I don't think it was, though. It's something I don't think I'll ever understand. Maybe something happened out there on that road, or maybe it's, like my boyfriend says, the conjuration of an overtired mind just to be on the safe side when I go to see him. I choose not to drive along that road in the mountains. This happened last December. I took my girlfriend on a late-night drive to see some of the illuminations in our town. There was a huge Christmas tree by AF Lake, and we both wanted to go check it out. I picked up my girlfriend one quiet evening in December. I remember it was raining and pretty cold out. I didn't expect much that evening, but it actually turned into a really fun night. We ended up staying by the river looking at the Christmas lights until about midnight. It was at that point we decided we wanted a change of scenery, so we set off on a late-night drive. We got to a nice secluded area and I parked up. We were facing a grove of tall trees. I drove down to the end of a forest trail. We decided to sit in the back seats together, to make it more cozy. I was back there with her and we were staring into each other's eyes. I could barely see her face because it was so dark. Just before we were about to take things to the next level, I noticed something. My eyes suddenly fell on the windshield. Before I tell you what I saw, I just want to emphasize something. We parked in the most remote location I could think of. It was a forest trail that led to a dense tree line. Nothing but darkness was ahead of us in our location, which could be described as the epitome of the middle of nowhere. With you now picturing the scene, let me tell you what I saw. There was a woman leaning on our car's hood peering in at us. She was an older woman and she was wearing a t-shirt. Why on earth would she be wearing next to nothing out here in December? It had been raining and I knew it was cold out. She must be freezing. Her skin looked pale. The strangest thing about the situation is if you see someone who looks pale and is dressed poorly in the middle of nowhere, you might expect them to be banging your windows looking for help, but not this woman. She just stood there peering in at us. She was glaring and I don't know why she was doing that. This all happened in a matter of seconds. By the way, my girlfriend hadn't even noticed that she was out there. I didn't want her to see the woman. I knew it would scare her badly. Honestly, we watched a scary movie once and it traumatized her. She doesn't do well with scary. I tried to keep her distracted. I looked back at my girlfriend because I didn't want her to notice that I was watching the windshield and I gave her a hug, and then I intentionally moved her field of vision from the windshield. And when I looked back at the windshield, I was utterly shocked to see that woman was gone. Did she wander back into the forest where she came from, or did she even exist in the first place? Maybe she was a spirit of some sort. I have no idea, but if there was a gun against my head, I would say that she was a human. Needless to say, we left in a hurry. I made some excuse about needing something from the store before we went any further. Use your imagination and we were away. I did wonder if it was all my imagination until I looked at the hood of my car in natural light. The following morning I discovered something. There were some indentations. There had clearly been some kind of weight or pressure applied to the metal and the dents were fist-shaped. We drove. We drove down a forest trail in the middle of the night. It was so dark out that you wouldn't be able to see where you were going without a light. It was raining and I think the temperature was in the minuses. What on earth was that woman doing out there? I have never told my girlfriend about this. I just wish that I had a dash cam or something so I could have taken another look or been able to show you. It was seriously creepy. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to a close friend of mine and she told me that she wishes to stay anonymous, but I can tell you that she's in her 20s and she's very attractive. I will tell this story as if it happened to me though so you can hear it the way my friend told it. I've been working late at the office pretty much all week, which caused me to miss my regular bus home. Usually, if I wasn't working late, then I would get off the train and then get the bus. But because I was working late, I had to get a taxi home all week. On the night that this experience took place, I got off the train and saw that there was only one other person waiting in line for a taxi at the usual spot. I was relieved because at least I wasn't going to be in for a long wait. Just as I was about to stand in line, a man came running down the station steps. He ran ahead of me and got in line. This both surprised and annoyed me. I couldn't really do anything about it. I should have rushed to get in line myself. I guess I tried not to let it bother me. It would only be a short wait until I would be on my way home. I lined up behind the man after waiting for about 15 minutes. A taxi turned up and picked up the first person waiting in line, a middle-aged woman. The metal shutters to the train station stairs behind me slammed closed. It was later than I thought. I wondered if the lights in the station would go out and all the staff would leave. I didn't want to be here alone. Well, I wasn't alone. Yet the man who pushed in front was still waiting on his taxi. Moments later a taxi pulled up and the man got in before he got in. I think we were waiting for another 20 minutes. This was a much longer wait than usual. And come to think of it, The first taxi that pulled up was black and the second one was black. Was it just the one taxi driver working? So I made sure I took a look at the driver's face. I waited there alone. It was a little unnerving. I hoped that a taxi would turn up soon. I didn't like being on my own in a dark area so late. Then finally, after about another 20 minutes or so, a black taxi pulled up. It was the same driver I saw earlier. I got in. I was tired of standing there and glad to sit down. I told the driver where I wanted to go and asked if he could drop me off at a certain location. "Can you take me to the construction yard?" I asked. The reason I asked for the construction yard was because it was really close to my apartment and drivers and delivery people can never seem to find where I live. The construction yard was well known, so I always asked to get dropped off there. With that, we pulled away into the night. It was a dark night. Summer had gone and autumn was here. The taxi driver then said, "Sounds like hard work. Are you going there to work the night shift?" I was a bit too tired to enter into a conversation with the driver, so I replied something simple like, "Yeah, I guess I'm always cautious when giving out personal information." He didn't need to know, so I kept it vague. We got closer to the construction yard and I started to route around my bag to get the taxi fare. "Do you really work at one of those office buildings by the construction yard?" The driver asked me what a nosy guy I thought. "No, I don't," I replied to him a little sharply. I didn't know what he was trying to get at. Why did it matter where I worked to him? As soon as I told him I didn't actually work there and I wasn't going on the night shift, he changed. Instead of pulling over by the Connor Instruction Yard, he sped up and kept going straight. "Hey, you can drop me off here. You're going past it." I said. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do. He didn't say a word. He just looked focused on the road ahead. "Driver, here is fine, let me out." I said. I could now hear the fear in my voice. It had a shaky quality to it. "You got in my taxi on Tuesday night, didn't you?" "Yeah, I remember you," he said while glancing at me in his rearview mirror. He was showing no signs of stopping the taxi. I was really scared now, scared of where this was all heading or where we were going. I had taken a taxi every night that week, but what did it matter? Why was this guy so invested? I sat there frozen in the back seats of the taxi. I can still remember the song that was playing on the radio and the smell of the leather seats. I couldn't understand what was happening. We drove for another couple of minutes down a dark highway. The lack of light made things 10 times worse. Up ahead, I saw the lights of a convenience store that I use regularly, and I can remember thinking vividly, "Will anyone find me when this taxi finally stops?" I was scared of what the driver's intentions were and what he was capable of. I think at that point I reached my limits. Silent tears began to roll down my cheeks. What next? I wondered, and then, to my absolute shock, we pulled into the convenience store's parking lot. As soon as we stopped, the driver turned around and spoke to me in a calm voice. "I'm really sorry. If you want to make a complaint about me, you can. Here's my card and all my information. You can call my bosses and tell them my name. It's all on my card." He went on to explain that he was the driver who picked me up and dropped me off on Tuesday, and because of the location I wanted to be dropped off at, he remembered me. He said he wondered why someone would want to be dropped off at a construction yard at night. Then he said, "You know that guy who was waiting in line ahead of you at the train station? Well, that guy also wanted to be dropped off by the construction yard." I remembered that guy, the one who pushed in front of me. The driver said that while he was taking him back to the construction yard, he made a couple of calls. He was saying stuff like, "I'll be there soon, and I think it will be about another 20 minutes after I get there." I was thinking, well, so what, they have a night shift in the yard? I can sometimes hear work going on when I walk past it to get home. Why is my taxi driver not taking me where I want to go? I asked him if it could have been a coincidence and what he was trying to get at, and he replied that guy didn't seem to be an employee. There were no cars or trucks in the parking lot, and there were no lights on in the office or in the yard. Then I saw a minivan parked just off to the side of the entrance. It had blacked out windows. There were about 4 people in there, and when my headlights landed on the windshield, they all ducked down as if they didn't want to be seen. So for that reason, I found those people and my passenger very suspicious. So I'm really sorry. If I took things into my own hands, and if you want to report me for it to my bosses, then I'm fine with that, but I could never be fine with dropping you off there with those men in that van. I stared at the driver. It looked like he had tears in the corner of his eyes waiting to come out. I wondered if there was a reason why he understood the red flags. He was a young guy and he was taking a big risk by doing what he did. It almost made sense, but I guess that it still could have been a coincidence. Then I remembered something that made me shiver while I was waiting in line. My mom called. She didn't like it. When I worked so late and she wanted to check in with me, I remember the words I said on the phone. "Yeah, I'm about to get the taxi now. I'll get it to the construction yard." That man was in front of me at that point in the line. It began to make sense. Maybe the driver was right. It did seem like the guy in front of me was planning something. I haven't thought about it for years, and I'm so grateful to the taxi driver. Of course, I didn't report him. By the way, he might have just saved me that night from those men and that blacked-out minivan. I don't want to even think of what their intentions might have been. There is a stretch of highway which passes through several quiet mountain towns that connects Gunma Prefecture to Saitama Prefecture. This highway runs alongside the Kana River. I was driving along this highway while it was getting dark out. Mount Miko was on the left and we could see camper van tents set up along the river too. My wife and I had been camping over a long weekend and we were heading home. She was sat in the passenger seat next to me chatting away, and I was getting a little depressed that I had worked the following morning and the trip was over in the back seats. My 2 children were steadily sleeping away. I looked over at the river. It was wide and its deep blue color made it look a little more like a lake. My wife looked over at me and said, "Hey, can we stop? I want to use the restroom." "Yeah, sounds good. I want to get a drink anyways. There's a rest area coming up soon." I think I knew that there was a place to stop just after the tunnel which was coming up. The road ahead had a gentle curve, so I applied the brakes as I rounded the corner, and I noticed that there was a bunch of people walking along the right side of the road up ahead. They were heading the same way as us towards Tokyo, with their backs facing us. I was surprised by what they were wearing. No one seemed like they were dressed for hiking or camping. They had colorful clothes that seemed a little out of style. There were elderly people, children, men and women of all ages. It actually took a little while to overtake the group. I had to take it slowly. It was really rare and kind of odd to see so many people walking out so late in a group that size. In my rearview mirror, I could see several of them raising their arms and waving at my car, presumably to get our attention or to get us to stop or even maybe warn us about something. They were just about to enter the tunnel that I had just entered. "What do you think they want? Shall I pull over?" I asked my wife in a quiet voice. I didn't want to wake the children speed up. She replied sharply. She had raised her voice. I looked over at her and she was staring straight ahead. I could see the whites of her eyes don't stop. She barked at me. Well, I did as I was asked. Something must have upset her. I sped up and fortunately there were no oncoming cars in the tunnel at the time. We drove through the tunnel and then I pulled over into the rest area. I then turned to my wife and asked her what was wrong. None of them were wearing shoes. She said to me, "Shoes? What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. Then I realized something a little shocking, and I was surprised to see that no one from that group of people had been through the tunnel yet, even though the distance of the tunnel was short. We sat there for a long while. I didn't want to leave until I saw them again, but they just never appeared. My wife then explained to me why she freaked out. She said she knew of a little-known urban legend about the River Kanana, which made her panic. A Japan Airlines flight that departed from Haneda in the Showa period in August unfortunately went astray and crashed into a ridge of Mount Okata, which is upstream from the River Kana. The voice recorder, or black box I think they're known as, contained a recording of the captain's instructions to the passengers, and they were asked to remove their shoes and assume the brace position for impact. These days, passengers aren't instructed to take off their shoes on flights during an emergency in Japan. Well, maybe just high heels. So she grew up being told never to pick up hitchhikers near the river, especially if they weren't wearing shoes. Could we have seen those passengers? If so, are they all heading back to Tokyo, where they departed Haneda Airport? I sometimes wonder if that's all they want to do, go home. It was scary, I guess, but it makes me feel more sad than afraid, those poor passengers. I wonder how they must have felt in their final panicky moments. It's no wonder they can't leave. I